You know that thing where you get an amazing pair of shoes at a really great price and want to tell everyone about it? Yeah, so do we. Here at Designer Shoe Warehouse, we'll give you something to brag about, like the latest styles from brands you love, or the trends everyone's obsessing over, or shoes that make you feel like, well, you. So go ahead, show off a little. Find shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. Head to your DSW store or dsw.com today. DSW, let us surprise you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy. And today we're talking to Ruth Whippman. She is a British author, journalist, and cultural critic living in the United States. A former BBC documentary director and producer, Fortune has described Ruth Whippman as one of the 25 sharpest minds of the decade on the podcast today.
Wow. Huge.
It's pretty good. Ruth is the author of the book America the Anxious, which was a New York Post Best Book of the Year. She lives in California with her husband and 3 sons, and her latest book, which we will be talking about today, is Boy Mom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we all have something in common, and your book starts with a moment that I have written about as well, which is we're all the parents of 3 kids, but all 3 of us had 2 boys first. We ended up having a girl third. You had a boy third. But I had the same experience as you, Ruth, which was all through my 3rd pregnancy. I'd have my 2 little boys by the hand. All kinds of people would walk up to me and give me some variation on the version of, it better be a girl. I hope it's a girl. I hope it's not a boy. I know what you're going for. I know why you're pregnant.
And it's like the boys are listening and you're like, this is awful. I know. It was really, that happened to me a lot. And it was even a therapist. I was taking my oldest son to therapy, and this was after my 3rd son was born. And she had pictures of her kids on the wall, and she had 2 boys and a girl. And she was like, I bet that's what you were hoping for. Like with my son, a therapist, like in earshot.
After he's already there.
Yeah. I was like, wow.
It's very strange. So it's a real aha moment for you as a feminist to realize, okay, boys can be seen as less than. We think we have to do so much work to have our girls appear as good as, and yet there's this weird thing where boy children are less acceptable or less desirable. And is that what made you decide to write this book?
It was a really complicated moment because I think people see it almost as feminist to like be negative about boys and men, which I think is actually really harmful for everybody. I think it's harmful for moms. I think it's harmful for boys. But yeah, so my 3rd son was born right at the time when the Me Too movement was just completely exploding. So this was 2017. Every time you turned on the TV or went on Twitter, there was just some terrible news about men, you know, and it was just like one thing after another. And my pregnancy hormones were out of control. And I was just like, oh God, 3 boys, you know, there must be something really wrong on a kind of systemic level about the way that we're socializing boys, that this is normal. And also I was just really curious about what would it do to these boys, like psychologically, this little generation of boys that is growing up with this conversation going on in the background. What is that like for them, you know, to grow up with that being the conversation about who they are?
And is that something that, as we say, like is in the groundwater, baked in the cake? I think it can be easy to disconnect that cultural message from like our cute kids at home playing with fire trucks. Is that something that we're bringing to the conversation or we're somehow letting in our home? How is that effect happening?
No, I mean, I think everybody has their own relationship with it. For me, you know, hearing that narrative outside, I just kind of got in a bit of a panic because it felt like, oh God, this is all on me to fix this. I have to like do everything to turn out these perfect sons that will go against all the norms and be sensitive and emotionally intelligent. And obviously, you know, in my actual house, my real boys, especially when we had a 3rd boy, it was like they were hitting and they were fighting and they wanted to play with Nerf guns all the time. And, you know, I didn't feel like I had this huge amount of control over how they turned out. And, you know, the wider cultural conversation gave me this really sort of difficult filter to see it. So I'm like, you know, they want a Nerf gun or like they hit their brother. Is that toxic masculinity? And is it my fault that this is happening? And so I think for the book, I wanted to really sort of dig into it in a very honest way and just be like, there are so many contradictions. There is so much complexity. We don't have as much control as we think we have. We have some, and there are things we can do. But, you know, how does the sort of back and forth between the wider conversation and what's going on in my home right now play out.
When I was a young adult, there was a book called Iron John that was really big in the 90s. And it was all about like men need other men and they have to go into the woods and do wolf howls around the campfire. And ladies, you don't get it, right? We really need each other. And you talk in the book about how the books that are out there about raising boys, some of them, have in the past been sort of like, moms, you don't get this. Like, stay out of this. This is not work that's for you to do. And what was your sort of response to uncovering that?
I really feel that. And it's like parenting books, but it's also something in the kind of wider culture as well that I often hear sort of men say things to me like, oh, you know, boys need this, or you probably don't understand, but boys need more like physical roughhousing or wrestling, or, you know, it's almost this sense of like, back off, lady, you know, this is so momentous, boyhood and masculinity is this very important thing that you couldn't possibly understand. It's got a little snip of that. And there have been great books written by women about boyhood, but I hadn't found anything that kind of brought everything together, you know, the personal, the political, the cultural piece, and, you know, and just sort of listen to boys as well. And so that's why I felt there was a gap in the market. I just wanted something that would look at all of it and look at it honestly, you know, I felt like there are a lot of parenting books where it's just like, do these 5 things and you will have the ideal child that, you know, that you've always dreamed of. And it's just like, well, that wasn't happening in my house, that's for sure. And so I wanted something that felt a bit more honest and real.
And you talk about how the flip side of that, like hyper masculinity and you wouldn't understand, is that it sometimes robs boys of things they also need in terms of emotional connection, ability to make friendships. So talk a little bit about that piece of it.
So I think this has been really invisible because, you know, when we talk about sexism and gender stereotyping, we often look at what the harms are to girls, like the kind of toxic messages. And it's almost like we want to socialize girls more like boys. So teach them STEM skills and teach them to be brave and assertive and courageous and be superheroes. And there's so much material, like if you're raising a girl, you know, if you go to the bookstore, it's like strong and mighty girls, girl superheroes, be a Supreme Court judge, be a, you know, a scientist. But what boys are missing out on is kind of invisible. And that is these like relational, social and emotional skills. And so I remember once going to the bookstore with my sons and I saw this magazine. I write about it in the book. There was this magazine that was like so obviously aimed at like tween girls. And it had this like pink sparkly cover and it had a friendship bracelet giveaway on the front and all these quizzes. And so it was like, my boys are like, obviously like looking away really hurriedly, like I can't possibly be associated with that thing. And
it hurts their eyes.
Yeah, it hurts their eyes, you know, their eyes are bleeding with pink. But then, and I looked at it and I took it out and it had this story and it was all about this girl and she'd been invited to these 2 birthday parties that were happening at the same time. And so rather than letting down one of her friends, she didn't want to disappoint either of them. So she was like running between the 2 parties, like pretending to be attending both and like sneaking into one and having the cake and then sneaking into the other and doing the games. And it was this like tale of emotional labor, you know, this like really overall, and I related to it, but I was thinking, you know, my boys will never read a story like that with a boy as the main character. You know, they will never read a story where the narrative is like driven by people and emotions and friendships, because all their stories are about battles and competition and violence and adventures. And it's like, those things are great, nothing wrong with them. But, you know, those sort of, that idea that you're a person who has to track the needs of other people and be in community and think about other people's feelings, those skills are really fundamental to human connection, and boys are missing out on them. And we're not really even seeing that as a problem. And I think it becomes circular because we don't really value what women value as a culture. We sort of don't ever see that girlhood has anything to offer boys, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, the point you make in the book, Ruth, that really was eye-opening to me is that we encourage girls to break free of stereotypes. We encourage parents of girls to raise them to subvert stereotypes and raise them without the stereotypes we might have. And then we don't do the same thing for boys at all. We don't encourage boys to subvert the masculine idea of what it is to be a friend or what it is to care about people. That's not something that we ask them to question. You be like a boy, and girls, you be more like boys, I guess, and then also be a girl. We don't ever turn it around, and they're missing out when we don't consider that they have stereotypes too.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, I think girls are encouraged, you know, it's like you can be, we talk about girls in this really sort of inspirational way, which is great. You know, you can be anything. Sky's the limit. You know, you can do whatever you want. The future is female. And somehow we talk about boys in this quite essentializing way. So it's like, I hear a lot of, oh, boys will be boys. Boys can't sit still. Boys are reluctant readers. Boys don't like school. You know, all of these quite essentializing things. And it's just almost like boys are just kind of biologically limited by these certain things. And this is just sort of what boys like and what they are like. And we just have to kind of work around that. And that's the best we can hope for. And I find that really sad in a way, because I think these stereotypes around masculinity, around not expressing your emotions, around connection, vulnerability, you know, the so-called emotional labor piece of it, you know, these things are really limiting for boys. And you're seeing now down the line with adult men that there's this loneliness epidemic with men at the moment in America. You know, 1 in 4 young men says that they have no close friends at all. And there's all these horrible statistics on loneliness. You've probably heard them all, you know, read about them in the news. And, you know, I think we are not giving boys a fair shake. We're not saying, you know, you can be a full, expansive human being in the way that we're saying to girls. And you would never hear, you know, these are like progressives who often use this kind of language about boys. It's not like some, you know, traditional, you're not talking about like some sort of trad wife situation. You're talking about the progressive conversation. It's still, we talk about boys in these very limiting stereotypes.
I want to dig in a little bit on that and how changeable we feel it is. We are talking to Ruth Whippman, the author of Boy Mom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity, and we'll be right back.
Hellions, it's time for some spring cleaning, and I don't just mean the coat closets. Doing your financial spring cleaning can actually be super easy when you let Monarch do your financial spring cleaning for you. One dashboard that gets your entire financial life organized. No more clutter, no more mess, no more logins scattered everywhere, just accounts, investments, property, and more, all in one place. Get your first year of Monarch for half off, just $50 with promo code FRESH. Monarch allows you to look not only at what you've already spent, but also to plan for the future. With Monarch, you can set savings goals, plan for big purchases, and notice spending trends before they become a problem. I can generate cash flow reports that show me what we spent this quarter, this month, what we're probably going to spend next month, and feel prepared, organized, and knowing how to plan for the future. No more surprises and a lot more clarity. Try Monarch. Use code FRESH at monarch.com to get your first year half off at just $50. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code FRESH. All my kids learned to swim when they were little. It was super important to me that they be confident and safe in the water. There was only one problem with that: taking them to swim lessons. I mean, the pools were freezing. There were always cranky adults doing laps right there. And it was definitely not, for any of us, what you would call fun.
Amy, heard. But now there's Goldfish Swim School. Goldfish takes a really thoughtful approach to swim lessons, combining research-based teaching with a warm, kid-friendly environment that actually helps kids thrive in the water.
Every detail at Goldfish is thoughtfully designed to create a golden experience, from shiver-free, warm indoor pools to comfy waiting areas for parents to professionally trained lifeguards on deck.
Goldfish uses an approach called the science of swim play, which combines guided play with proven teaching techniques to help kids learn to swim, build water safety skills, and gain confidence, all at their own pace. Lessons are designed to meet kids exactly where they're at.
If you've been thinking about swim lessons or just wondering where to start, this is a great opportunity. Right now, Goldfish Swim School is offering a waived membership plus your child's first lesson free at participating locations.
Just visit goldfishswimschool.com/free to find a location near you and enroll using promo code FREE.
That's goldfishswimschool.com/free, promo code FREE.
So, talking about this idea of what we put on boys, you hear all sorts of different things about this. Some people would say, and some media certainly says, boys are becoming completely feminized in this generation, and oh, they're soy boys, and all this kind of, talking points about how we're losing boys because we're trying to make them more female somehow. Other people are seeing this side of these statistics saying loneliness and lack of friendships. I guess my fundamental question there is, how much can we really affect outcomes here? Is it something that has to happen on a kind of national conversation level, or is it something that happens within our own homes, or both?
I think it's both. I think that parents, and we can do a lot in the home to change norms and to sort of open things up for boys. And I think a lot of it is about kind of naming the problem, seeing the problem for what it is, seeing the stereotypes, because sometimes they're really invisible. And, I spent 4 years working on this book and looking at these things, and they still kind of pass me by, and I'll be like, oh yeah. And then I'll sort of think back to something and think, oh yeah, that's quite sexist or limiting. And it's quite invisible in the culture. And I think we have to do it at all levels. We have to be having conversations like these. We have to be working within our own homes. And, but on a personal level, how changeable is it? I mean, I think this is one of the things that I explore in a lot of detail in the book, because after my third son was born and the whole Me Too thing was happening, and I was like, great, I'm going to just change everything and I'm going to be able to control this really, really easily. And great, I just need to do a few things. And obviously my boys are actual people with their own ideas and their own preferences.
We always have that problem. These children are actual people. It's so frustrating.
They're actual people. I know, it's so frustrating. But, I think that's not a reason to give up. I think we're very comfortable when we're talking about girl socialization. We're like, oh, there are so many harmful messages in the culture about body image, or about subservience to men, or about, princess culture, all of these things. And I think we can hold two truths at once. We can hold we don't have complete control of this, and they will get cultural messages that are harmful. And we can talk about them, and they will probably succumb to some of them. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't address them or think about them critically,
Ruth, you tell a story at the end of the book about your youngest son arriving for his first day of kindergarten. And it's an example of these things aren't writ large, but they're tiny and they happen all the time. And so tell that story.
Yeah. So when my third son went to kindergarten, there was this male volunteer, I think, possibly a teacher, possibly a parent, who was standing by the gate and greeting all the kids as they walked in. And we were kind of in a line of kids. And there were two girls in front of my son. And the guy was like, hi, sweetheart. And then they were, the next one would be like, hi, sweetheart. And then my son walks in and his voice goes down 2 octaves, and he puffs up and he goes, hi, buddy. And gives him a high five. That buddy sweetheart thing, it's so, it's so well-meaning. It was so sweet. It came from such a good place. But sweethearts and buddies are really different. A sweetheart is a sort of nurturing, protective term, whereas buddy is you're my peer. And it's sort of almost just a tick away from hey, buddy, before you get in a bar fight. And it's just people already at the age of 5, he's this little kid who's scared going for his first day at kindergarten. He needs nurture and protection in the same way that any girl does. And buddy, it's it's lifting him up. And you can see why it's sort of sexist both ways around. You can see why sweetheart could be patronizing, or it can kind of exclude girls from those back channels of power where all the buddies get together and in the locker room and slap each other on the back and whatever, make important decisions. But it really also excludes boys from that kind of nurturing. And that was one of the huge themes that came up in the book. Right from babyhood, baby boys get less nurture than baby girls. And actually, biologically, at birth, baby boys' brains are born more emotionally vulnerable and immature than baby girls' brains. So they actually need more of that kind of loving, supportive nurture to thrive. And girls are generally more resilient and independent. And so I think, this kind of masculinization of boys can be a very, very subtle form of neglect in a way.
You talk about the social time that boys have when they play with each other, that as screen time has taken over more and more of our kids' lives, that boys are even more likely to displace social time with screen time. And having 2 boys and a girl, that's definitely true in my house, I would say. That the 2 children who are more married to their screens are my 2 male children. Again, do you think that's something that's essentialist, or do you think that's something that's socialized, or is it a little bit of both?
I mean, I can't say for sure, but I know that the socialization piece is a big one. And that's the one that we have control over. Like the essential piece, the nature piece, we don't really have a lot of say over that. But there is a big socialization thing in the screen time thing, because I think it's very easy for boys to use screens as a social crutch. So I don't know how old your boys are, but I think in like teenage culture, it's like playing video games online and like having a friend over and being on the PlayStation. Because I think that kind of face-to-face contact is quite hard for boys. They're not socialized to do it. They're not given the skills to kind of really like talk in that kind of emotional face-to-face way that girls are taught. And so these screens come along and it's really easy to just like, oh, okay, a screen, this is going to smooth the kind of anxiety of the situation. So you are seeing this like displacement phenomenon is like quite significantly worse with boys at the moment than it is with girls. Boys are spending more time on screens than girls are, and they're spending much less time socializing in person. And I think it's something we really need to correct for.
You have a lot of very practical ideas about how to start changing these conversations, and we're going to talk about them next. We are talking to Ruth Whippman, the author of Boy Mom, and we'll be right back.
Amy, let me tell you about a magical place that is so exactly designed to be enclosed space, year-round fun for the whole family that I bet you already know what I'm going to say before I even say the name. Let's say it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Great Wolf Lodge. You got it, Amy.
My kids loved Great Wolf Lodge when we went. You probably already know that it has a huge indoor water park with a wave pool, lazy river, a bunch of massive water slides. But then your pack can hit the other attractions because, wait, there's more.
Great Wolf Lodge has adventure-packed attractions like Magi Quest, a live-action game kids can play throughout the lodge, plus the Northern Lights Arcade. Spent some quality time there, so your kid who loves the lazy river and your kid who loves fantasy games will both have a great time.
Great Wolf Lodge also offers great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. Unpack the car once and you're settled in to have fun. And with 22 lodges across the country, you're always a short drive away from adventure.
We've both had such great times at Great Wolf Lodge, so bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Learn more at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack. Amy, when I'm having a good hair day, it usually makes my whole day better. And that's why on every day, I'm taking Nutrafol.
Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand, and it's the #1 hair growth supplement brand personally used by dermatologists. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are peer-reviewed, NSF certified for sport, and clinically tested.
Nutrafol offers multiple formulas for men and women, tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors, so you get support that's actually right for you. Adding Nutrafol to your daily routine is easy. Order online, no prescription needed, with automated deliveries and free shipping to keep you on track.
Let your hair be one less thing to worry about. See visibly thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair in 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol.
For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you visit Nutrafol.com and enter promo code LAUGHING.
That's Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code LAUGHING.
So in the book, you have a lot of practical suggestions about what we need to be especially modeling, I think, right? For our boys, a lot of this work, unfortunately, as we always say, we'd love to just tell them something or give them a pamphlet, but we actually need to model this stuff for them. And one of the big things we need to model is emotional intimacy. So let's talk about that a little bit, why boys need it and what it looks like from our modeling.
Yeah, so I think this starts right from birth. There's all this research that shows that parents sort of unwittingly project all these like masculine qualities onto boys. So when a baby boy cries, the parents and people are more likely to see him as angry, whereas when a girl cries, they see her as sad. And that sort of pattern, and like people handle boys more roughly, they sort of roughhouse with them, and mothers especially have much more kind of emotionally involved conversations with their daughters than they do with their sons right from the beginning. And they tend to speak to boys in these like shorter sentences, even a different vocabulary. They don't use so many emotion words. They use like competition words, winning words, those kinds of things. And they took more instructions.
This is frightening because as you're saying it in my house, I'm like, yeah, that tracks. This all tracks.
Right. And me too. I mean, I don't have a daughter, but I can imagine it would just be so much, because this is what's been modeled to us. And most of these things that we do are unconscious. So I think the first thing is like becoming aware of those patterns and just thinking like, oh, do I do that? Looking inside ourselves and thinking, oh, yes, that seems right. And then trying to correct for it. So I think really engaging with boys about their emotions, which means listening to them. And I think, especially in this time of this sort of the culture wars, it's sort of like, oh, you don't want to listen to any of boys' problems because, they're so privileged and actually we should be listening to girls. But it's really about hearing what they actually say, empathizing with them, talking to them about feelings, using that emotional vocabulary, exposing them to role models of good friendships and relational stuff between boys and men. So whether that's in life or in art, art being, books, TV shows, movies, and just sort of keeping this all in mind. And then the other thing is just kind of nurture. As I say, I think it's subtle, but there's like a real measurable difference in the kind of like nurturing care that baby boys and young boys get and young girls get. It's like we tend to see boys as sort of bad, not sad. That's one of the phrases that I use in the book. But it's like that starts, from the angry baby boys and goes on through discipline problems in school and, behavioral issues and the way that teachers deal with kids. And I think if we can actually look at the emotions that are driving boys' behavior and sort of see them as these emotional, relational beings and see ourselves, as part of that, then I think that's, a huge part of it.
There's a quote from this book that I put in bold because I loved it so much. You said, I'm willing to be annoying in service of this project. And the project that you're talking about is sort of questioning, now, why is the boy not the one who can become the good friend to the girl who's lonely? That you question the little things and you're willing to be annoying. You're willing to have your kids sort of your eyes at you.
Yeah, because it is kind of like you become a bit of an eye roll with all this stuff. And, my mom was like a feminist in the 70s and 80s. And, there was a lot of conversation about, that's sexist and I couldn't have Barbies and I couldn't have pink and all of that. I'm not that extreme with my boys, but I think it's like calling these things out, like just naming them. We were watching The Babysitters Club on Netflix the other day. I don't know if you know that series. And it's like, all the babysitters are girls and they sort of say quite a lot of negative things about boys just in passing. And it's like, if Netflix were making a show about, that was like based on a book from the 80s that was called like Science Club and it was all about boys, so there were like 4 boys in Science Club. In the like 2023 or 24 reboot of it, there would be some girls in Science Club. But like in Babysitters Club, there's no boys. So I think, I want to say to my boys, look, you could be a babysitter. It's a great way to earn money. It's a great way to care for kids. It's really fun. And like, why do you think there are no boys in here? Why do you think they're saying these negative things about boys? And just like pointing it out, because otherwise it just passes by, just applying that critical lens.
I really like that approach because it feels sometimes when you have these conversations, it feels like, well, someday all of society will change or we'll just be stuck here. And those kind of conversations feel to me very accessible. I'm definitely having conversations about gender and expression that I never had as a child with my kids because the world is changing and the conversations are changing. But also just modeling that you are available to question things, I think is so smart for kids in such a wide range of areas because it says, I'm not even sure the answer, but let's ask this question together about whether this role is correct. You talk about in the book, which we haven't really touched on, some of the Andrew Tate influence, the kind of hyper masculine influence that is starting to affect boys, that boys are falling under the influence of some influencers who are far right, incel. And I think one of the solutions is the constant willingness to have conversations about masculinity and what it looks like. Because if you don't have them, these conversations are going to come to you at some point. Because I don't know many boys who haven't at some point come home and said, actually, what if the world is this other way?
Oh, absolutely. And you can understand why they think that. It's like, why don't we have Men's History Month? Or, it's a complicated time to be a boy. They didn't know the history. They weren't there for the whole history of patriarchy and oppression against women. And I think we've got to treat those conversations kindly. I think you can kind of panic and be like, well, shut up. That isn't open for debate. And I think we should listen to those feelings. I think it probably is quite hard right now to be a boy and hearing about everybody else's like marginalized experience and not your own. And we have to give them the context and help them to understand why it's happening like that. But also I think there is a space for their feelings.
The point this book makes so many ways so well is that it's an oppressive system for everybody. That the status quo, that boys will be boys and you don't play with dolls. That's not what you want, buddy. You have to come over here. And then girls doesn't get to play in the train corner, whatever. That is something that's harmful to everyone, and including our boys who might need a hug once in a while, right? They might really enjoy.
Yeah. I mean, like supporting boys is a huge part of it.
It's a part of it, right? That boys too get to be who they want to be, get to question what it means to be masculine, get to throw out the old rules, just like girls do. So this isn't make sure your boys are thinking of the other marginalized and oppressed people around them at all times and feeling bad about it. That's the opposite of what you're saying. It's saying like, let boys be who they want to be, just like we want for the rest of us.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is a much more psychologically healthy way to grow up. So if we don't want boys to like harm other people, then we need to give them a healthier and more connected upbringing.
Ruth, tell us where our audience can find you, find the book, and find more about all the things that you talk about.
So the book is called Boy Mom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity. It's available anywhere you buy books. My website is ruthwhipman.com. I have 2 P's in Whippman. And I write a Substack where you'll find my other writing, which is called I Blame Society, which you can find on Substack.
We will link to that.
I have to give a shout out to the cover art of this book. It is phenomenal. I love good cover art.
I love it. Yeah.
When you go check this book out, look at the beautiful cover art because it is very striking.
Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, because in the acknowledgements, you write the acknowledgements for a book and you always write it before you've ever seen the cover. So I wanted to thank whoever did this beautiful cover, and whoever you are, please reveal yourself to me because it's gorgeous, and thank you.
We will put the link to the book, to the Substack, and to all of Ruth's work in the show notes for this episode. Ruth, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Stitch Fix. Shopping is hard. Let's talk about it.
I don't have time to shop for clothes.
I have to buy everything in 3 sizes to find one that fits. They know me at the post office.
Workout wear is my only wear.
Stitch Fix makes shopping easy. Just show your size, style, and budget, and your stylist sends personalized looks right to your door. No subscription required, plus free shipping and returns.
Oh, wow. That was easy.
Stitch Fix, online personal styling for everyone. Take your style quiz today at stitchfix.com.